So another thing that I see in a session are all of your chords. So when I'm sitting in front of you, technically, I'm seeing all these SOSs, and I'm having a conversation with your guardian, a conversation with your buffer spirit. All that is happening energetically. You and I might be having a conversation using our mouths, but at the same time, I'm actually having a separate conversation with your higher self. And I follow what I call a chord. So off of your shoulder are all of these different lines in all these different chords. So for example, if I'm looking at you right now, you have you have 6 chords running off of your right shoulder. And each chord, I have learned for me, connects to a different generation, which means that your buffer spirit comes in as this female, but 6 lines up, 6 generations back, this is your dad. So this is your dad's side. If I look back 6 generations on your dad's side, I can see that there's a man that's coming in. He actually has a lot more information to share with you than your buffer spirit does. So that is my first connection to how I see a chord. Now, when I tap into his energy, then he shows me other chords that go this way, and that'll be everything that happens in his now moment, all the choices he made, the way that he was feeling, and how does that imprint, because that's an SOS, how does that kind of reverb down the chords to who you are now? I like to differentiate between what a lineage line is and what an ancestral line is. So a lineage line would be, somewhere 15 degrees away, you are connected to the King of France, right? That is a lineage line. You are connected to that person by lineage. But you have an ancestral line as well. And that ancestral line is the people who are directly connected to you that come in, who though you may not know, they know who you are. And that's where we get information from personality traits, we get information from old karmic ties, we get information from our how are we making decisions in the moment. Though we think that it's just kind of up to our own mind, you would be shocked to see how much of that information is actually coming in from the spirit realm. Depending on your cultural upbringing or religious background, people will hear terminology like past lives or Akashic records, genealogy, pre-existence connections, soul self, soul contracts. All of that is actually the same thing energetically. It just has different names and different slight differences on the story. So what I do is I look at an SOS and I see how that SOS is connected to them now. Now that might be you and your mom had an argument at the age of 13, but if I go beyond that SOS and I look at the SOSs that you are connected to by having a conversation with your ancestral lines here, then what that does is it gives me further information on stuff that you are connected to that is like 15 generations ago. And sometimes it goes so far over that I can't follow a line between you and that other individual, which shows me that you are picking up on an imprint karmically of something else that happened. Now you can make up your own association of that is a past life for me, or that is a part of my soul's design, is to have a connection with this chord over here. So what I do is I bridge the gap. I take this chord that you have a connection to, and I look at where you are now, and we talk about what this chord is and the connection that you have to that now, and we work on acknowledging it, receiving the message with compassion and empathy, but then severing it. Because we don't want these karmic ties to affect the way that we are interacting in our present now moment. And what ends up happening is after we cut that cord, there is a short, maybe 7 days of when your soul and your body are kind of alkalizing, and then you start to feel different. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it takes about 7 days, but you start to feel and interact with the world differently because we identified that old karmic tie and then we cut it. So let me go into a little more detail about how we cut certain chords in an appropriate way. My grandmother was adopted. My grandmother on my mother's side was adopted. And she was adopted by a really lovely, lovely woman. But her birth mother has a story. And that story was she was neglectful and she didn't want to take care of the child. So she just kind of left the baby, and the baby was found by this other woman, and that woman ended up raising her. Now that is the story that has been passed down generationally from my grandmother to my mother to her children. Now, what's really fascinating is as my mother talks about this, my mother talks about the story a lot, and she always talks about gratitude. Like, I'm very grateful that my mother was raised by this adopted parent. And that is always the message. However, when I look at my mother's story and I can actually see my biological great-grandmother, the one who left the child, I look at her and she always faces sideways. She never faces you front to front. So when I look at her connected to my mother, she's always facing to the side. And I ask her questions, why are you only facing to the side? And it's always based in shame. That is her energetic imprint. It is based in shame. She feels like she is unable to face the family. My mom was getting ready to prepare a speech that she was going to be given based on gratitude, and she always brings up the story of her grandmother. But my mom was having a hard time, and I was home with her, and she was saying, I can't find that speech. And I said, well, let me help you. She goes, no, I think that I'm not supposed to find it. And I said, well, why? And she goes, I think that I have to tell the story differently now. And the fascinating thing about that is I watched my great-grandmother come into the room, and she's always kind of aloft next to my mother, but in that moment, she turned to face my mom. And it was the first time that my mother was facing her grandmother. And my mom says out loud, she says, it's time to change my story. So my story is no longer about gratitude. My story is about gratitude and compassion, because I had no idea what was going on with my grandmother. And by looking at my grandmother's energetic cords, I could see, well, she actually was going through this and she was going through that, and she made these decisions because she felt like she had to. And by understanding all of those cords, you change your present now moment. So my mom immediately elevated, immediately in that moment, and I watched my great-grandmother's spirit get really, really bright. It illuminated the room. It's an example of the benefits of cutting an energetic cord.